Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this NYU School of Professional Studies webinar, The Power of Giving Circles. My name is Danielle Orenberger-Hopkins. I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations here at NYU School of Professional Studies, also known as NYU SPS. And today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by our three incredible panelists. First, we have Akira Barclay. She is an NYU SPS alumna who received her MS in Fundraising and Grantmaking in 2012, and is also the founder of Fresh Philanthropy. We also have Halima Leak Francis, Ph.D., who is a double violet from NYU STEINHARDT. She's the professor and program director of public administration at Tulane University. And we have Chantal Bonitto, who received a fundraising certificate from NYU SPS in 2006, and is the director of Inclusive Philanthropy at Planned Parenthood Federation of America and Planned Parenthood Action Fund. We are so appreciative to have these three expert and industry leaders participating in this incredibly important and interesting discussion. And I know we have a lot to cover today. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome Chantal to kick off the conversation.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank you so much for your time today. It is such an honor to be on this panel or moderating this conversation with two other amazing Black women. I want to say it's very rare that I'm in development conversations and panels with all Black women. So yes, tonight is the night. And I just want to share that as the Director of Inclusive Philanthropy at Planned Parenthood, this program at Planned Parenthood was started because I'm a fundraiser. I'm a frontline fundraiser. You know, we're always thinking about building pipelines, right? And I think that organizations, especially white-led and white-centered organizations, are thinking about diverse philanthropy and how we become transactional in receiving funding from communities of color. And I think that this conversation is really important because, you know, while we can make the case as fundraisers that this is a constituency that we should reach out to, it's important to remember that Black donors are not an emerging constituency in philanthropy, right? People of color have been giving, Black people have been giving since the beginning of time. And I think this is our first time tapping into it if you are from a white-centered and white-led organization like I am. So while we can make the case, right, population growth, the wealth gap is closing, and organizations tend to respond to the needs of their donor population. So by increasing the donor population into people of color, programs tend to shift in that direction. What I like to say to organizations that contact me and say, I need donors of color, I need to diversify my pipeline is, have you done the work internally, right? I call it the ABCs of inclusive philanthropy. There's an assessment and readiness. There's a buy-in from staff, leadership, and board. And there's community engagement before you get to D, which is donors, right? And so I want you to listen to this conversation, but I also want you all to understand the work that has to happen internally before tapping into this very important history and segment of philanthropy for communities of color and Black communities in particular. So with that said, I want to welcome my panelists, Halima and Akira. Again, it's a wonderful conversation to be having, and I know that your relationship this is kind of full circle for you both. So do one of you want to tell the story of how you first met and how we came to this evening? You're on mute, Akira.
Thank you. We met at NYU, Marion Stern's History of Philanthropy course. And I think it is important to note that, that one of my favorite courses in the master's program, by the way, but throughout my degree program, discussions about Black philanthropy usually came from me bringing them into the classroom. And so in this History of Philanthropy course, we had a robber baron project, and I don't think of her as a robber baron, but I chose Madam C.J. Walker. And Marion Stern had Halima come in and teach us about Black philanthropy, because she, her knowledge it runs deep. You will see this evening. And I'm very glad that she was able to join us, because it is really a full circle moment.
Yeah, and it was a great opportunity. You know, as I think about and I reflect on that time, I was a doctoral student working on my PhD at NYU, and my research centered around Black philanthropy, specifically towards historically Black colleges and universities. And in talking through that and discussing it with Marion and other students, there was an opportunity really to shed light on the historical context of philanthropy within the Black community, and the impact, the lasting impact that it's had. So, this is certainly a full circle conversation. I'm so happy to be a part of it so many years later. And it's interesting. It feels good that the discussion has aged well. It is still very timely, still very relevant, and I would argue probably more so now than it was then. So yes, so this is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to get centered in that moment, Akira, you shared a quote earlier around your research of Madam C.J. Walker. Would you mind starting with that right now?
Yes, I love this. And this quote is from Madam C.J. Walker's Gospel of Giving by Tyrone Freeman, and that book is being released soon. It says, "In the African-American experience, philanthropy did not originate in wealth, but rather in resourceful efforts to meet social needs in the face of overwhelming societal constraints and impositions. It was less concerned with the exact form of gift giving than with the intent and appropriateness of the gift in responding to need." And I thought that quote was a great way to anchor this conversation that we're having, because it really gets to the heart of the uniqueness of philanthropy in Black communities.
Yeah, I just love that quote, and I can't wait to read that book. So thank you so much for sharing, because I haven't gotten my hands on an early copy, but I know you have. Thank you so much for sharing such an important center for us to begin with as we talk about the power of giving circles. And so I want to begin this conversation by asking you, like, for people on the call with different varying understandings of what a giving circle is, what are giving circles and how are they distinct from collective giving?
Giving circles are a model of collective giving, where a group of people come together, they pool their resources to make grants around a common cause. And so that's a very general definition on purpose, because giving circles vary, in size, member composition, focus areas, the way they meet and how they decide to make their grants. And it's that, I think it's that freedom and flexibility to craft a giving circle into what you want it to be that is part of what's fueling the popularity of them at this time.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. And I just want to announce to all of the participants that you can put questions in the Q&A section, and I'll also be keeping my eyes on the chat. So feel free as we move along, if you have any questions you want us to address before we get to Q&A, please put your questions there. Thank you so much, Akira. So, recognizing that Black philanthropy is important for the sector, why are Black-led giving circles depicted as a trend versus a source of learning and inspiration for this current movement?
So I'm happy to chime in here on this. I grapple with this and I wrestle with this conversation about the trend and the movement and the moment. First, I want to say that giving circles, Black philanthropy, is not a movement. It's an established practice, and it goes back very far, very deep. The first mutual aid societies, which were a precursor or predecessor to giving circles, one of those collective giving models that Akira mentioned, dates back as early as 1787 with the Free African Society, founded by Absalom Jones and Richard Allen. So, this is a old practice. This is an established practice. And with the Free African Society, and I've written some notes to just prepare for this conversation, I've thought it was fascinating to see that they were established to support one another in sickness and for the benefit of their widows and fatherless children. So this notion of community support, this notion of collective responsibility has been one of those themes that has maintained throughout history to what we see today, quite frankly, in giving circles. So as we kind of think about learning and inspiration from the current conversations, that is one of the things that emerges for me. Another is that the prevalence and the resilience of these organizations. So there is documentation that talks about more than 40 what were termed Negro societies in Philadelphia in 1831. 16 of them were male, 27 of them were female. So the way that giving circles are structured around priorities, around focus groups that you want to target in the work that you do, around identities and who you work together with. Those are some of the things that prevail today in what we see in the current iteration of giving circles.
And I will add to that, even going back to our initial opening conversation about the classroom, we have to think about the research and the information that we are given about philanthropy. Oftentimes, philanthropy is defined in very narrow terms. And so giving circles, while they are not new by any means, that being Black-led, Black-led giving circles are not a huge part of the existing research on giving circles. And there are a number of reasons for that. Some of them documented being sort of that lack of trust that you mentioned that has to be developed. And so I think unfortunately what we have is sometimes a case of not researchers not being able to make those connections with Black-led giving circles and then sort of making a conclusion that just, they just aren't there, which of course we know is not true.
Yeah, I think the opportunities with giving circles include, as I said earlier, building trust and deepening relationships, right? And not expecting a transactional relationship, but something that can be more transformational. So giving that time to honor the power of these giving circles is really important as a fundraiser myself. So thank you so much. So my second question is around the term philanthropy and philanthropist, right? And that gives us the idea, when I do this activity with people, like, who is a philanthropist in your mind, right? And you get this image of wealthy individuals and institutions making really large gifts to charitable organizations. So when you think of your philanthropic experiences, whether that's personal or professional, how do they differ from the traditional image of philanthropy?
Well, I will say, I think the image, and someone said it and now I can't get it out of my head, of the little guy with the monocle from Monopoly, and that as a philanthropist, and that of course, my experiences with philanthropy are anything but that. But I would say that my experiences with philanthropy both are sort of centered in communal care and community rather than transactional, the way that we are typically engaged with it, even as fundraisers and as grant makers.
And I'll add to that, just in thinking about experiences with philanthropy and the image and representation there, for me, it is, there are multiple dimensions. So, Chantal, you talk about your work in fund development as a fundraiser. So our representation in that space, so practitioners who are working in fundraising and grant making. And as I think about my own career, I learned rather late that people like Booker T. Washington, who was a key fundraiser in the Hampton-Tuskegee model, moving that forward. While the model has been critiqued, he was a key figure for a systemized framework for fundraising. Also, when we think about representation around scholarship and research and philanthropy, Akira mentioned earlier, there is research dating back, Black-led research dating back to as early and probably earlier than 1909 with W.B. Du Bois' work in the Atlanta University Studies, where he talks extensively in one of the chapters in one of the conferences about efforts for betterment or for social betterment among Negro Americans. He talks for about 2 chapters about Black philanthropy right alongside white philanthropy and advancing things like political rights, education, healthcare, care for the elderly. So when I think about our presence and our representation, it usually goes back to history for me, because that's just, I think it's important to elevate and to acknowledge the history, just as we think about where we are going forward and what is on the horizon, and also who we frame as a philanthropist and who we frame as having the ability to operate in this space. Because let's be clear, philanthropy, there's a power dynamic in that as well. So when you share the spectrum of power, then there's some other implications that go along with that. So the absence of a group of people, there are implications. The presence of a group of people, there are implications. So that when I think about how we're represented in those spaces, that's how my framework tends to kind of deviate from the traditional conversations around philanthropy.
Yeah. And I would say that that's probably the key difference between my experience professionally versus my experience personally as a member of a Black-led giving circle. What I know about fundraising and philanthropy, I did work in fund development for about 11 years before making a turn into grant making, and the power dynamic there is really important. It's one that is almost opposite of the experience that I have personally as a member of the Southside Giving Circle, in the way that valuing the voices of the women and girls that we are doing the work to support, just my fellow Giving Circle members, valuing that lived experience that they have, and understanding how that contributes to the work that we do as a Black-led giving circle that supports women and girls. So, and what I mean by that is, all of the women that are a part of our giving circle have something valuable to contribute from their lived experience as a Black woman living or working on the South Side of Chicago. And we bring all of that into the work that we do. Professionally, it's a lot of teaching and making the case, where in my personal life with the Giving Circle, it's innate. So that's the dichotomy, I would say.
Yeah, and power is a big part of that, right? Like, I'm so happy you went in that direction, because I think by engaging donors of color in my role, I'm trying to shift the power paradigm of what philanthropy can look like, right? By saying we're not just beneficiaries of the work, we're benefactors, just like everyone else. And I also think, I come from a feminist fundraising background, and I remember working in that area through Ms. Foundation, through Women Moving Millions, this idea of time, talent, and treasure. And I think as we become more intersectional, this idea of ties and testimony has been added as models of generosity. It's not just the treasure you bring to the table, but the connections that you have, like giving circles, or the testimony, the lived experience and authenticity that you bring on this side of philanthropy. That's really important. So I'm really happy that you lifted up the idea of power here. You know, how has history shaped, and I love that Halima's here, and like I found little, like there's so many hidden stories of Black philanthropy, and I question like why they've never been shared either. Like as a Black fundraiser, where there's a pipeline issue there too, you know, like as a fund development person, there aren't many of us working on this side of frontline fundraising. You know, how has history, or now this newfound history, or even the traditional history, shaped how Black Americans give?
So as I think about how history has shaped how Black Americans give, there tend to be, and I caution, or I hate to distill it to three, but three themes that I see emerge, and certainly there are room for many more, but these are kind of three dominant themes, and I think those themes I would characterize as priorities. So the spectrum, or in the history of Black philanthropy, has historically and continues to focus on things such as education, social change, political advancement, economic security strategies, basic needs within the community. So they are pretty consistent in some of those themes that we have, that are priorities that are specific to our community. Our approaches is a second way that history has shaped how Black Americans give. So there continues to be this sense of collective responsibility, collective community focus, the emphasis on holistic engagement. So you as a donor, you as a contributor, bring your time, talent, treasure, testimony. That is a very holistic model of giving as an individual. The notion of relationships. So it's around kinship. So it's not only personal one-on-one, we have a friendship, we have a relationship. It's not, it's deeper than that. It goes to kinship and a sense of responsibility and honoring the relationship that you have. And by extension, the notion of power that can sometimes be reflected in philanthropy, it looks different, right? So it looks different because you are giving to someone, or you're giving to support or uplift someone who you have a relationship with, or who you can very closely identify with. The third way I think that history has shaped how Black Americans give is the institutional focus. So giving to churches or faith communities, giving to educational institutions, giving to things that have historically been community anchors for the Black community. Those are things that if you look back to those early giving models, those early giving activities, we have been present in and active in since the very beginning. So we maintain that kind of historical knowledge, that historical approach to giving. And, you know, it's very interesting for me to see that we've been able to kind of capture that, even though these stories, these narratives are not always made readily available. So it's fascinating to see that history still has this impact today.
And I think that the carrying on of that custom without it being explicitly described is part of the uniqueness of Black philanthropy. And just we're able to do this because of the lived experiences again. So we didn't have to sit in a classroom and learn it. There are plenty of people right now that their eyes are being opened to the fact that their mothers, their grandmothers, you know, their aunts and uncles are philanthropists, because it hadn't been framed that way. But once you understand philanthropy in its true sense and the history of Black people and giving, the light bulb turns on, and then you're able to recognize it in your own life in a very different way.
Yeah. And Akira, I'm glad you brought up the lived experience piece, because as I just reflect on my own relationship with philanthropy in this conversation, the thing that brought me to this conversation was the narrative that historically Black colleges and universities struggle because Black alumni don't give. And immediately I was like, that does not align with my lived experience. I know Black people to be hugely philanthropic. I know that we give back to our institutions. So there's some deeper reasons. We need to dig a little bit more deeply into that. And HBCUs and fundraising is a completely different conversation. But it was not that simple. It was not that simplistic. And I find that that argument has been applied to other challenges within the Black community. So this happens because you don't do. And the conversation, or recognizing the depths of the history of Black philanthropy, is completely counter to that argument. It completely disavows that argument. So yeah, the matching of lived experience and history versus the narrative that we receive, I do think is an important nuance to really acknowledge and pay attention to.
And it's true for Black-led giving circles as well. And so that, sort of the root of this conversation, it's the comparison of Black-led giving circles to other giving circles, and how that a lot of the ways that Black people give just don't register on the radar for those that are measuring it. And so in addition to who's doing the research and the lack of trust in that dynamic, there's also this idea that philanthropy has to look a certain way. And so if you are not culturally competent, you can miss a lot of the ways that generosity shows up in the way that Black people give. And so that again, what I was reading, what I was being presented with, did not at all line up with my experience doing research on Black giving circles back when I was at NYU and throughout a fellowship. The narrative that I'm seeing is, now Black people are just now emerging in these circles. And that it's just not true. And I wanted to mention some of the giving circles that have had longevity, that have been around since the early 2000s, and that are still doing work, and where they are. I tried to make like a short list. Zawadi in New Orleans, Louisiana, has been around since 2005. The Heritage Quilters in Warrenton, North Carolina, has been around since 2001. The Next Generation of African American Philanthropists in Charlotte, North Carolina, has been around since 2006. They were inspired by another INGAP from the Triangle area that's been around since before even then. So there was a specific effort by Lynetta Gilbert in the early 2000s that was based on, decades of her research prior, that really helped to seed Black-led giving circles in the South. And so I don't want that cluster of giving circles to be left out of this conversation about giving circles and why they are having such appeal in today's time.
Yes, thank you so much for saying that. And it relates to a question in the chat, like what is the first step someone should take if they want to become a philanthropist? And I think what you're saying addresses that. It's like, how do you decolonize the term philanthropist and philanthropy? And, just as an example, my mother is from Central America, and she was a teenage mom. And whether we had food on the table or not, she was sending money back home, right? And so as someone, as a first generation American who's losing those ties to like my family in the countries that they're from, like what happens to my philanthropy now? This money that was going somewhere else, how is it being catalyzed within this country in this context? And I said to both of you, I'm like, I want to join a giving circle. Where do I join? How do I start? And so I think it's important to understand that we're all philanthropists, right? And I think this idea of the carpetbagger philanthropist is something we need to throw out the window and think about the true history and more inclusive lens on the history of philanthropy. And that's why I'm really grateful for both of you in having this conversation. So now that we have a better understanding of Black philanthropy and the significance of Black-led giving circles, how can we use this information to make a difference?
Well, immediately you can make the decision that you want to give, and that you want to give in a way that's informed by the way that Black people give. I mean, we talked a lot about a sense of communal care, care for the almost like a family nature. You're caring for yourself, you're caring for others. So less of a transactional relationship. You actually can take a look at what you have to give, get in contact with someone and ask them what they need, or pay attention to what they're asking for that they need. And then you can enter there. I think one of the very unique things about giving circles is that they're not limited to just giving their financial grants. There is a huge element of civic engagement where giving circle members are engaged in sort of working to make a change at the root of the issues that, you know, the organizations and the people that they're helping. Also technical assistance. You want to be a philanthropist, think about what you have skill-wise that can be valuable to someone in need in your community. And I think that there's also this idea of valuing the voices of the people that you're gonna help. And I think that that is a clear piece that is missing in the institutional response that Halima talked about. It's really, I think, the core of what giving circles, you see giving circles forming in communities that have sort of been pushed to the margins of philanthropy. So voices that are not heard enough. A lot of grant making can be prescriptive and patriarchal even. Giving circles are a way to distinctly move away from that. And so I'm more than happy to help anyone who's looking to connect with a giving circle in their area. I can be reached at Akira at freshphilanthropy.com. You can go to freshphilanthropy.com and you can start there.
Perfect. So I was hoping we get to the Q&A. Halima, is there anything else? There are a lot of questions, so.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, I echo what Akira was sharing about starting a giving circle and really giving thought to your relationship with the organizations that you seek to make an impact on or to support. Heritage Giving Circle, which was established in 2017. I'm a co-founder with two other women out of Dallas, Texas, Keila Wallace and Francois Booker Drew. We really sought in establishing Heritage to fund Black women-led nonprofit organizations that were historically under-resourced for a host of measurement types of reasons. So that was something that we wanted to bring to our grantees, that technical support that Akira mentioned, that emotional support because there's a level of emotional support for those who lead these organizations. So as you're establishing your giving circle, you know, start with your community, start with the people who you're connected to, but also work to be very clear on what impact, what difference do you want to make. And I personally encourage people to support organizations who may not have access to the support for a host of different reasons, or they may fall under the radar, but they are embedded in the community doing the work. So those are my thoughts on, as you seek to establish a giving circle, some things that you can consider.
Thank you. And I think like institutions, while Black-led giving circles don't get the credit, like I think larger institutions are starting to have programs that look at their work or their funding through a race equity lens, such as funding women of color organizations around capacity building, or making the application process much simpler, or taking more riskier incubated organizations and funding them. Can you share more, or can you share like, why haven't Black-led giving circles been getting the credit for actually shifting the culture and how institutions are giving their grants now?
I think, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah, that's a hard question.
You say it, the R word? I'm kidding.
Because
Systemic racism.
Um,
The same reason why the narrative isn't shared.
exactly. That's what I was going to say. So the same reason why philanthropists and philanthropy are described in such narrow terms is the same reason why Black-led giving circles don't get the credit for pioneering a way of giving that is more holistic, and quite frankly, more effective. I think that with COVID, we see that, you know, you can eliminate, you know, this arduous grant process. You don't have to take an organization through the ringer with, you know, all of these sort of roadblocks or barriers to get to the funding. Like, you can just have a conversation. You can make a visit and then, you know, make the grant and get the money out of the door. So I think that, you know, this is the way that Black-led giving circles have been operating since the beginning. So whether, you know, you want to give an institution credit for, you know, making a rapid response grant during a time of crisis, I think that's great. I would hope that institutions will continue in that practice and understand why it's so important for the same reason, you know, that you were willing to put that process down to get the money out of the door during COVID. It's, you know, the work that nonprofit organizations are doing is always urgent. And I think also you have to think about who is in positions of power. So there's a power dynamic between grantees and funders, and then there's also, you know, institutions follow their leader. So you have to think about who's in the position of power, who is making the decisions about how the work of an institution will be carried out. And, you know, how culturally competent, how well informed are people about the many, many different cultures and contributions from people who are, you know, not within that narrow definition, you know, a little monopoly guy. So I think that there's work to be done. I hope that everyone will walk away from this conversation understanding that at any period of time where anything is being done significantly in philanthropy, there were some Black people there. You just haven't learned about them yet.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna, you guys, you women, sorry guys, it's gendered. You all can look at the chat. I think some comments that have come up include, and I'll get to that question, Dana. Black donors often give some of the highest percentages of their incomes to philanthropic causes compared to other racial groups, but they're not often thought of as the conventional face of philanthropy. Their spirit of giving is rooted in family and community rather than the benefactor-beneficiary relationship. So thank you so much for lifting that up, Sonal. The Susu comment, that is so funny. My family's from Panama and Jamaica, and my Jamaican side, I always knew of a Susu. And so that's why giving circles, it's definitely true. So Ajoa says, I think people don't know that they exist. I've been in the fundraising industry for about 5 years, and this is the first time I'm hearing about a giving circle that's not in the form of a Susu. And so I think there's a learning, I think, from my West African folks and my Caribbean folks, that giving circles do exist and have existed in America in a very, I don't want to say traditional, but when I saw that list that you shared, Halima, of these organizations that have existed since the 1700s of Black giving circles, like societies, they were organizations, like within, they were organized and organizing and moving funds. And so I think that that's a lesson, like, we're not homogenous, right? Some of us come from different places, and learning African-American history was something that was new to me as someone from the Caribbean. So know that they exist. So I wanted to lift up some questions. Have any panelists visited Martha's Vineyard during Black Philanthropy Month and seen the types of wealth representation in the organizations that they support? Have you all been to Martha's Vineyard?
I have not.
I have not as well. However, this kind of connects to another question that I saw in the chat about Black Philanthropy Month. I do think that those types of collectives and gatherings, and also Black Philanthropy Month, have been very valuable in amplifying this conversation. Just as I've kind of looked at or seen the spectrum and the evolution of Black Philanthropy Month as an initiative, as a kind of a grounding space for this conversation. I'm thrilled to see those discussions emerge, especially when they are highly influenced and led by Black voices and Black individuals. So no, I've not visited Martha's Vineyard, but to speak to those collectives being brought together and advancing representation for Black philanthropy, I think they've been hugely valuable.
Absolutely, and I think more from other people understanding, like we all knew about Black August and Black Philanthropy Month, and this was a way for non-Black people to understand and engage in the hidden stories of Black philanthropy, even the understanding of giving circles, and I think that's why people may see it as emerging, even though it is not to us. Ironically, I was supposed to go this August, and COVID, but historically in my family, we don't come from intergenerational wealth, and there are Black families that do have wealth, and I think I love when I see people of all colors that can say that they've given $1 million gift or a $25,000 gift, because it's an example that high net worth people of color exist, high net worth Black people exist. We see them activating their philanthropy in very interesting ways, I think it's wonderful that giving circles are a way that individuals that are giving their funding as individuals are doing it collectively as well. Because I know when you lifted up those giving circles, I know members within some of those giving circles as individual philanthropists. And so I just think that's a beautiful way of seeing it translate. And they go to Martha's Vineyard every year, for example. So I think that's a wonderful example. So I'm gonna get to the next question, which is, what is the role of the Black church in philanthropy? So tithing, right?
Yeah. So one of the key things that I like to make sure that I share in forums like this is giving in the Black church goes even beyond faith. There is a faith tradition of tithing, but oftentimes Black churches are the center of a community. And so the money that goes into those Black churches is then sort of granted out within the community and even abroad to support a number of issues. And so I know Giving USA always has, this huge slice of the pie, that's giving to religion. And I think without having the cultural competency and understanding the significance of Black church, you could, sort of mistake that for simply an exercise of faith, when it is an exercise of faith and then some.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's go to another question. And if you have a question, just put it in the Q&A box as opposed to the chat if you want it to be answered, because they're populating, everyone. Let me make sure I get everyone earlier. Why is now an important time for Black people to give and support a giving circle?
I think now is it. Well, I always say now is a great time to join or start a giving circle, but now, especially because we are in a time of change. I would hope a dramatic change, but in a time of change that's only going to change for Black people if we change it. So giving circles give people an opportunity to learn about their communities, build a deeper relationship with the change makers in the communities where they live. Just to go back to you talking about who you know as an individual philanthropist and learning that they are also part of a giving circle, that is a key element of being a part of a giving circle. The education and the almost training that comes with being a part of a giving circle leads many giving circle members to then also give on their own as individuals. So it is just like a very ripe training ground for philanthropists. It's almost like philanthropist boot camp, but like probably more enjoyable.
And along with that, so I think about kind of this holistic approach to involvement and addressing issues, and then also kind of creating the society that we want to see. Charitable giving and philanthropy, volunteerism, all of those spaces, they operate as an additional sector. So, if you're doing civic sector work or you're talking about public administration, part of the world that I work in, we look at government, nonprofits, and philanthropy and private sector. And philanthropy is a space that is very unique in how it operates, and being engaged in that space allows you as a donor to have a voice. So, voting is a huge conversation right now for obvious reasons. And philanthropy is another way to mobilize and amplify your voice. And many giving circles, they do create, or giving circles just generally create a community of collective voices. So, imagine the philanthropic impact, but kind of translate that to civic engagement, translate that into engagement in the private sector. So what you've done is built a community and brought people together around a shared cause and a shared practice, but now that has all these kind of offshoots of benefits that happen as a result.
Absolutely. At this time, right now, there are giving circles being formed that act as sort of political action committees. So, people getting together to pool their funds to, bolster a candidate's campaign. There are giving circles that are mobilizing around supporting Black-owned businesses during this time when so many are struggling because of COVID. So giving circles are incredibly important during this time, really because of the attributes that I named earlier, just the flexibility, the responsiveness, and just the overall respect for the grantees that are being supported during this time. That being able to build the relationship when organizations are having to wait and sort of prepare lots of justification for why they need the help. Giving circles have been proven to be more nimble in that way, and taking that process down in a way that a lot of the institutions haven't responded. And I see a question about mutual aid, which is great, because mutual aid is another model of giving where you see a lot of mutual aid groups, and they are very clear about not being charity, not being philanthropy. And I think that what's great about mutual aid groups is that there is a give and take that is the mutuality in that group, where some people are just more comfortable that way, and it eliminates the power dynamic that we discussed during this conversation. So I think that that's a key thing, and so that they're not the same, they're similar, but not exactly the same.
Thank you for answering that. And we have like less than 5 minutes and so many great questions. This question around evaluation: do Black-led giving circles follow up on their gifts in terms of evaluation? How do they determine what is a successful gift versus what is not?
I can speak for my giving circle. Yes, we do. Again, we have relationships with the Black woman-led organizations that we support. We are usually in relatively close contact with the leaders of our grantee organizations, and we check in, we ask how things are going, we sort of review goals and see, we let the organization, the leaders, tell us how they have been able to take the funding and use that towards their goal.
Yeah, I would agree with that. In terms of approach, a lot of it is centered around empowering the organizational leaders to own their success and own how it's evaluated. So, as a grantor, there typically is a framework that is pretty prescribed that says, you fed 5 ducks and you did this and you did that. But with the giving circle that I'm a part of, a lot of it is much more relational. It's really listening to the organization and giving them the space to be authentic about challenges, because there, quite frankly, is progress and there's learning and there's success even within challenges. So as an organization, looking at how you evolve, how you do your work, where the pain points were, if they can articulate that, that's another area of evaluation that we consider and look at. So I will say, I think that across many giving circles that I've heard of in terms of how they evaluate and how they assess, there tends to be this notion of empowering the organization to tell their story and to really be authentic about what their experiences are, because that's another element of this. Traditionally, when you go after grants, you want to tell your grantor that everything was successful. And we know that that is not the case. So I think that's critical to the effectiveness. I think that's critical to the evaluation, because we can respond to that, and then they can take that response and go to other funders and be able to speak to how their organization has grown, how they have evolved. So it's really, as I think about evaluation models, so to speak, it's more of a learning model of evaluation that's rooted in narrative.
Well, it's transformational grant making as well, right? Because you can learn from failures, you can pivot and things of that nature. So we're at 5:58. I'm going to take one more question, and I'll let you pick, Akira, which question you want to answer. And I think if anyone else has any other questions, they can email Danielle, and she'll find a way to get in touch with us.
I actually can't tell which ones are.
So here's one, like as a frontline fundraiser. Yeah, no worries. As a frontline fundraiser, I knew this question was going to come up, right?
Okay.
How do you get in front of a giving circle? And answer that honestly, because fundraisers want to hear like the real deal, right?
I mean, I would reach out to the leaders of the giving circle. If you are aware of a giving circle in your community, I would reach out to the leaders and tell them, you know, I work at this organization. I became aware of your giving circle. I want to learn more about what you do. Can we have a call? Can we meet so I can, you know, introduce you to the work that we're doing? I don't see that connecting with a giving circle would be very different than what a development professional would do to try to make connections with any other funder. The experience is likely to be very different, but I would not think that there has to be any distinctly different way of reaching out. You know, most giving circles have someone that is, you know, visible either online to connect with. If you're out in the community, even better, you know. So Halima, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I would say, just from my own fundraising practice, research is at the center. So start with research. And when I say research, it's not only knowing that the giving circle exists, but understanding the priorities. So for my own giving circle, there have been, so our grant making is focused on supporting Black women-led organizations that support Black women and girls. And there have been organizations that have come to us that are not Black women-led. So that's a non-negotiable priority for us that we take very seriously. So researching the existence, one, and then researching and understanding the priorities, two, would be a part of that. Oftentimes, some giving circles are housed out of foundations. So they're considered, or they're structured as donor advised funds. So that may be an entry point to connection. But generally speaking, you can do the research and find the presence of a giving circle relatively straightforward and easily.
And I see one last question before we have to run, about how can we push philanthropic institutions to incorporate the successful practices of Black philanthropists and giving circles into their work. And that is a task. But what I would say, just based on my experience, is the institutions have to be convinced that engaging with Black people and Black donors, you have to go beyond the business case for engaging with someone. Black people are not just, some group to pick up in February and now August. And so when you start viewing Black communities, Black people, Black leaders, Black philanthropists, whether they are high net worth donors or Giving Circle members, when you start viewing people holistically as the full participants in philanthropy that they are, I think that adopting the successful practices of Black-led giving circles and other Black philanthropists will come a lot easier. This idea of communal care versus a transaction, that's going to be difficult if you don't consider that person a part of your community.
Right, the internal work is necessary. Thank you so much for saying that. I think that's a lovely note to close on. And Danielle, I'll let you put up that slide. And again, if you have questions, I think siphon them through Danielle, and I'm sure Halima and Akira will respond to them. Thank you both for your time today. I know you hear the baby in the back. I'm normalizing motherhood in a pandemic, okay? So thank you so much for being with me in community, and have a lovely evening, everyone.
And I, of course, want to thank all three of our incredible panelists, these incredible women, for allowing us to listen to such a robust and important and informative dialogue here. I know personally, I've learned so much in just 1 hour. And so I'm really excited for this conversation to move forward. And so I've included ways to stay connected with NYU SPS Alumni Relations on social, where we'll be posting snippets of this conversation, as well as if you are an SPS alumnus or an alumna, please join the Violet Network. And any additional questions you can shoot to our email address right here, nysps.alumni@nyu.edu. And that's all from us. So one last time, I want to thank all of our panelists, and thank you to everybody who's submitted questions for making this just such an important and great conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.